Hello, my name is Christopher Kinman, and it's an honor to welcome you to conversation number 6 in the Communal Practices series. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Brian Gross. To formally introduce Brian, I would have to say that he is the Executive Director of Matsqui-Abbotsford Impact Society, an organization that historically has focused on providing addiction and recovery support for young people in the Abbotsford, British Columbia area. However, as you will witness in this conversation, Brian is not particularly interested in formal identities, as much as he is focused upon the network of relations that surround us and that we are engaged with. Clearly, with Brian, the formal descriptions are just not adequate. So instead, let me touch upon the network of relations that make up Brian for a moment. First of all, let's touch upon something we loosely call the arts. In this video, we start with a conversation about creating things, whether that's music, writings, performance art, or other creative actions. And by the end of our time together, we realized that the whole conversation was really about creating things. Art for Brian always starts from a web of relations and always ends with an altered and enhanced set of relations. We could say that the arts are all about forms of communal engagement, about the knotting together of relations. But there's another emphasis in our conversation that I want to draw attention to. Brian talks about his relationship with a group of people that thoroughly changed his life. They're called the drug war survivors. This is a group of people in Abbotsford, British Columbia, at least this group was in Abbotsford, who are unapologetically drug users. They come together to support each other. Brian met them as part of his formal work. However, when he encountered them, his world flipped upside down. He found that he was not meeting with a group of people who were less than, who were weaker than, who were somehow degenerate in and degenerate to our communities. People who were in need of our charity. Rather, in meeting the drug war survivors, Brian found something beautiful. And he found his own life was dramatically impacted. We could easily argue that this is just what happens when we engage in communal practices. We encounter a network of relations. Life is not the same thereafter. I find this video to be a wonderful exploration of how an encounter with what Brian calls a network of relations forever changes one's world. In a manner that reminds me of the writings of Gilles Deleuze, we don't engender change. Rather, we create encounters. We create meetings on the road. Please enjoy this wonderful creative force, this knot of relations, whom I call Brian Gross.
Well, I think the thing I've been reflecting on for quite a while is I think in terms of the art practice, in some way, in some ways, because every piece of art that I've ever made, and I don't just write music, I've written plays, musicals, and done a lot. I had a career as a performance artist back in the 90s
You
in
did?
Los Angeles. Oh yeah, I was famous for getting naked all the time. And I think I hope I'm still famous for getting naked, but in different ways.
A
Uh,
different kind of nakedness,
Although I
maybe.
may go back to that other
Yeah,
more authentic way of being naked. It's just working in a youth organization. You know, I've had to figure out how to navigate some of the more naked parts of myself, and certainly my music practice. Um, I don't create anything unless I'm gonna think, oh my God, did I just do that? Like I wanna I make things that try to take me to the edge of what I'm comfortable with. Uh,
mm,
and then to kind of sit there, right? Because when I create something, there's a lot of rumination that happens with that, right?
mm.
There's sometimes I'll work for months on a song, and songs with lyrics with like narrative in them, although mostly they're not narrative. I really try to treat narrative as a collection of details rather than as a progression.
That's
So
good.
I
Good.
look at it as a network of details
I love
that,
that.
so there's no like, I try not to have any kind of this happened, therefore, or this led to. It's
Mm,
just this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Um, and and it's for both the audience. I'm the audience of my artwork as much as anyone else is. And for me to kind of rethink the details of my life and reconfigure them and kind of, I feel like everything that I create is building my network out bigger. And
mm,
so there's periods of my life, like notably between like 1993 and 2010, I was very involved in the 12-step world. And that was my reality, right? It was very much like I am Brian, and I am an alcoholic and an addict and a sex addict and all these other things. Um, and the lovely thing about looking at things as not a story but as a network is that I don't have to efface those old stories. They don't have to be disrupted in any way. They just get built into a bigger network. So that's all part of my experience still. I will not deny it. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. It was a product of my environment to a large extent. I could, because if my environment had been different, I'm sure the details would have been different. But I don't. I can encapsulate all of that stuff. And the beautiful thing about creating art is that I sit with it for so long that it's kind of like pruning a network, right? You're Because networks, if you have all the information in the world and you just keep using it, then you basically have no information, right? Because it's just all undifferentiated stuff. But what doing a uh, art with life, with the details of life, really helps me to prune that network so that I think I can deal with novel situations much better than
yeah.
I would be able to if I had everything set in these little narratives that I had to, like, oh, if something weird happens, I have to diverge from this. No, it's just another node that gets in there and it interacts with everything else.
It reminds me of the Deleuze and Guattari idea of assemblage, which they saw in some respects as opposed to narrative. But an assemblage is, because you use the word network, it's a network of relations, and you could start anywhere. There's no beginning and there's no
Right.
end.
Yes.
You can start here, you can go there, you can end here. And I find it really useful. I just finished doing um, an interview in one of these with this gentleman from the Lower Similkameen Nation. And as we're filming, a little child comes by and interrupts us. We're outside, and there's a pine tree, and there's the sound of wind and the trees and the pine trees. And I realized for this man, um, everything was about the land. And so the assemblage that came in that film was much more important than the flow of kind of how it was put together, right? And that's what I was thinking of when I was listening to you as you describe art. And it was very communal. This network. It's this coming together of diversity in surprising ways.
Yeah, and I would say all my, all my relationships are, I'm so grateful that I've had an art practice all this time because all my relationships are encapsulated in this stuff. And when I listen to my music or work with it, or um, uh, there's a lot of remembering that happens,
Right.
and
Hmm.
I think I'm able to speak both lightly but also deeply about
Hmm.
my experience as a result, because I'm not treating it as this is a truth creating experience, but it is an assemblage, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's something here in this assemblage that could be helpful for me to share right now. So
Well, I think it's such a useful idea for songwriters to think of the song as an assemblage, like you are, rather than thinking it has to have some meaning and some purpose.
yeah.
The assemblage is much more interesting.
Yes, and it um well, I mean, I have a hard time looking at, or I think there have been periods where I've looked at my art practice as kind of career oriented, um, but not very much, right? It's really a practice that I feel like I just have to do. There have
Yeah,
been periods of time where I haven't done art, and but there's little pieces of art in there that just really light the way about what that time of my life was about.
right.
Uh, So
That's lovely. And I'm really appreciating this. So where we see art as extending into a world. I was going to say our world, but it's more than that. It's a diverse and fantastic and scary and beautiful world that kind of comes together in these kind of ways.
well, and I can make the jump too to the other topic you wanted to talk about
Yeah.
from that, because um, really uh, my work has been in the community, has been about moving further and further from this person centric thing to a network centric thing, and there um, there absolutely are people who are key to some networks, right? So there's just what one elder in drug war survivors calls as natural leaders, right?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
are who people turn to, and to intentionally support those natural leaders so that they can uh, feel supported in the work that they do. I mean, one thing I've noticed about myself, I mean, I think I took a lot of risks in my life, some of them with very little support around me or very tenuous support around me. And uh, I paid quite a heavy cost for some of those risks, but I don't regret them at all. They were things I had to do. Um, but I really, you know, if I want a community or members of that community to take some risks and make some changes and explore some things, I think the thing that has to happen is people have to feel supported. Risks don't happen because someone's courageous.
Mm.
Risks happen because somebody feels supported, right? To take,
Don't happen because of someone's courageous. Risks happen because someone's supported.
yeah.
What a beautiful concept. And so is that how you conceive of your work?
Definitely. I mean, I am constantly, because our systems don't really fund
No.
that, right? But the way I get around that with a lot of our work is what we're selling is um, a program where people with lived and living experience are going to get the opportunity to steward this project and make the decisions about what we do with all of our funding.
Hmm.
So we are engaging with their target population, right? And we're engaging with that target population on the topics that they want to fund. But we're also really opening it up for people to, because here's the issue, like, and this comes up in youth groups and all kinds of stuff that and adult groups that we support, is there could be a really ignorant or innocent statement made about a certain race or
Hmm.
something like that, and that could happen in the middle of any conversation, right? That could spring up at any moment, especially when you get like 14-year-olds who are just talking about what they see,
Mm-hmm.
um, with no sense of like uh, of what could be behind that,
Hmm.
right? Behind what they see. And if you're trying to get something done, it gets really hard to slow down that process at that time and say, okay, well, let's see if we can unpack this. And um, I still find that really hard to do because a lot of the participants have everyone has these ideas of how things are supposed to roll. We're doing a project, we're doing a program, we're supposed to get stuff done, and then something comes up that kind of that's challenging the community, and there's a real tension between, well, okay, do we put everything on hold that we think we're supposed to be getting done here, or do we does this become the work? And that takes a great deal of, I don't know, willingness or a sense of support for me, for sure, because to put the brakes on anything, or to even offer up that option, because I would never say, okay, let's put the brakes on things here because this thing happened, so we need to discuss it. It would be, oh, this thing is happening. I've seen in some places where people put the brakes on it, and I've also seen where they just keep going. And I could totally understand that, like, a group might want to get their thing going because there's people dying over there that we're trying to help, right? So it's really about putting options out there. One of the big things that I've been working with is this idea between um, when you're working in a program that has hierarchies that are going to be evident to anyone, or that they're going to be assumed by anyone, is that you have to make a real strong differentiation between what's opt out and what's opt in. Because if you're in a position where people see you as having authority, if you give them a opt out option, like, do you want to do this? It's going to be very hard for some people to say no, right? Whereas instead, if you give them an opt in, like, I've seen this happen before, I don't know if it would really apply to this situation, that gives them a, oh yeah, well, I do think that would apply to that situation. Let's go down that road. And they're not confronting the power. They're going with what, and I think there's all kinds of things when it comes to, motivational dialogue or motivational interviewing. When it comes to that, there's similar things in counseling that are set up, which are like, for instance, when I'm counseling people around substance use, they may be kind of talking about their cocaine use as an example, and I'll say, well, I'm not sure if we should be talking about your cocaine use here, because it doesn't seem like it's a problem for you. But I don't, that, and so then that gives, again, a person an opportunity to say, oh yeah, I don't think we should. Let's move on to this other thing, right? And it's a very similar process about being very intentional about creating ways for people to opt into something when there is a power dynamic going on, which there always is to some extent.
Right. To me, there's something very vital about what you're talking about. And I tell you, I think where I'm coming from on that. Something I've always been interested in is this interface between the institutional and the communal, and the demands of the institution and the expectations of the institution, which so often are just so far away from what is needed on that communal level. And I get interested in people who have to navigate those differences. If I can go back to Deleuze and Guattari, they used the concept of the metaphor of the tree as opposed to the rhizome. And the tree is institutional. It's got its center, it's got its branches that come out from the center, and it will last forever if it's a good institution, those kind of things. And the rhizome is more all over the place.
Yeah.
And of course, it turned out, as we found out lately, that trees only survive because of rhizome anyway. But anyway, it's navigating that interface. And what I'm interested in what you're doing is quite frankly, I think most people don't navigate it. They just stick with the institutional expectations. And with you, you're realizing that there's this navigation that has to happen. Does that make any sense?
It what came to mind for me was something that I read in your dissertation, which is the striated, and I forget
Yeah,
the
yeah,
other,
similar
where
idea. Yeah,
I think people try to define things to try and avoid having problems, right? Like they just like, I'm going to create this thing and it's going to be real. I'm going to present it to someone and then they're going to accept it because it makes sense. And I don't think our lives make sense. I don't think that authenticity makes any sense, right? It shouldn't, because that would not be authentic. It would be a construction if it made sense,
yes.
right? And it would be a construction that's limited, right? I think we're always evolving, and this is, I'm going to constantly go back to the kind of addiction world thing, but but I changed from looking at I mean, I was involved with this idea of an addict in terms of a disease, and then I moved forward into like thinking of it as my life challenges got tangled up with substance use, right? So that which makes a lot of sense. But I've kind of evolved more, and I don't know where I'm going next, but the to like this idea of episodes. Every single episode of substance use has its own context. And some of that may be habit and maybe, but there's there and I love that people like binge watch shows now because I can just say you wouldn't binge watch the same show over and over again, right? Every everything that happens, there's different details that are going on. And it's a freeing thing to look at it that way because you don't know what the next episode is gonna be. Whereas some of these other ways of institutionalizing the idea of substance use or problematic substance use or addiction or whatever doesn't allow for that kind of the rhizome thing to happen, where what's going on with that tree over there may affect what you're doing here, right?
Mm.
And so being able to use language that um, broadens the meaning of our behaviors. Um, I enjoy doing that and finding new ways to broaden that even more. So again, we go into this network position where I'm not an identity, I'm a collection of details that I'm constantly reconnecting in different ways, right?
You were so Deleuzian.
I have not read Deleuze, so uh, this was the one thing I was concerned about on this call. I read a whole bunch of like, Foucault and
Yeah.
Sartre and all kinds of stuff, and when I was a teenager and in my 20s, but I haven't done a lot of readings.
Well, let me explain why I say that now, because um, Deleuze made a real study of the event and felt that we needed to see the event as unique and never has come before, never will
Yeah,
come again.
yes.
And there's much more to it than that as well. But boy, that's what you were talking about.
And this was another topic that we kind of discussed we might talk about, but is this whole identity thing going on, right?
Mm.
Where
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, I think partly because we have so little community, and also because our communities are so big, right? Like in some ways the uh, we don't get a defined role in our community. It's very hard to find that. When you get schools above a certain size, there's only a certain number of roles in a high school, and they run out of them, and then people don't have identities. Um,
Mm.
uh, and I think that's where all of these like really strong sense of my identity and my gender or my sexuality or whatever becomes. I think all those things are true, but they become really important to people because they don't have some other source of identity. And there's certainly, I mean, there's always all this research that's been done about how substance use can be a real low-hanging fruit identity. If you have a identity conflict or you don't have something to identify, just becoming a drug user solves a lot of that for you. Um, so I think,
This is interesting to me because I think kind of the move out from the concern for identity is that network. that you're
I
talking
think
about.
everyone you can easily argue that someone is not who they think they are, right?
Yes,
And
always.
that's where all these arguments come up. This is where all this bifurcation and the polarization comes from, in my opinion, is that we are uh, standing firm in our identity. So,
And identities always leak.
yes, well, they
Right.
should,
Yeah.
and because they do so much, um, if you've built up that identity in your persona and among the people that are around you, you can't help but get defensive,
Yeah.
right? Because you're leaking all the time, and you have to kind of, you know, uh, say, no, this is who I am, right? And I think that's where, a lot of relationships get messed up, is because people change all the time.
Yeah.
And I know it took me a long time to get to the point where, when I was in a romantic relationship with somebody where they seemed to me want me to be someone else, I, was able to say, "Oh, you're looking for someone else. I'll get out of the way," right? So, um, uh, a lot of cases I thought, you will never find that person, but that's not for me to say, right?
No.
That's your journey, and I don't want to get in the way of it. I don't want to pretend that I can be that person if and that comes back to that authenticity thing, right? It doesn't make any sense. There's no way I could explain to one of these partners, oh no, I can't be that way because, you know, uh,
No. No. The move from identity to network is timely. It's I think it's kind of the question of our day in many respects.
yeah, we're going to, if we just keep supporting these narratives and pruning out everything that doesn't fit, we're going to miss a lot of what is meaningful to us. And when we miss what's meaningful to us, then all kinds of things go wrong, right?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
people are not living lives that they feel are meaningful or valuable, but they are protecting them all the time, that's a recipe for disaster.
Um, Someone I work with, I consider a friend who is trans, and she also doesn't want to be limited to that. You know, she's also a really good counselor. Um, she's also someone that a lot of different people find that they can trust and talk with.
Mhm.
So she sees the need for something more than the identity, and it's quite lovely to watch her. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you came to me at one point, like when we were discussing doing this, like wanting to know, like, could I talk about communal practices in the LGBTQ community, and uh, yeah, I don't really, I don't find it useful to get too um, wrapped up in any of these
No,
communities or identities or
but
um,
this is the conversation that I won't say this is what I was looking for and expecting, but this is certainly welcome. And this is what I would like to have seen, So it's a lovely surprise, and because I think it's something we all have to look at. Identity is pushes on us in every place we go, all the time, and we're supposed to be something, right? And we're supposed to be all these different things in different contexts, and I think the network or the rhizome or by the way, the other idea was striated space and smooth space.
right. There we go. Yeah.
The smooth space. Anyway, I think those are really beautiful ideas that we can explore, and
and find ways through these
Well,
tangles.
is through dialogue, right? I think, and it has to be, it can't be dialogue where people uh, feel threatened, right? So even the people who think there are like that we're catering to snowflakes, they feel threatened coming into a room. Like that's the whole cancel culture, whatever, cancel
Yeah.
culture or whatever, is that people, they're almost as snowflake-ish as the people that they're thinking they're snowflakes
Oh, very
be-
much.
because they're coming in thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be canceled if I say what I think, right? And um, so you have to create environments that are that allow people, again, allow people to take these risks. I think the thing that communities or funders of community-based projects miss is that have like creating an opportunity for someone to contribute and participate in in the institution is is not something that everyone's going to go, oh boy, yay, you finally gave me an opportunity to contribute. Because what that means is that they're going to take their authentic self and risk that into the community. And a lot of people, if they don't have support around them, um, they are going to decline that opportunity. And the problem is that people often interpret that as they don't care, when actually they care so much that they're not going to risk that.
That's a good point. You work in the city of Abbotsford, and if I can broadly state, you're working in the addictions field, but I think that's an identity that's too limiting myself. But I want to bring up an observation I saw a couple of years ago. During this opioid crisis, there was a point in time when all the communities around Abbotsford, the deaths from overdoses were increasing, and in Abbotsford they didn't, and they went down a little bit. And I can't help but believe that had something to do with the drug war survivors. I'd like you to talk about them.
So that's been an incredibly personal journey for me. I mean, when I first got my job in Abbotsford, which was, I'll just, I think it's helpful for me to say this to people, is that we had, my partner and I had immigrated from the States because he's from Indonesia and was on a student visa there. And at that time in the early 200s or 2000s, we couldn't get married for immigration purposes there. So, and the only two countries that allowed same-sex partners to immigrate as a couple was Australia and Canada at that time.
Mm.
And he wouldn't have qualified on his own. Anyway, so we came up to Canada not knowing anybody at all. And I went through a number of jobs. I kept getting bored with them. And he had a job that he really wanted to quit, but I was so all over the place that he was like, he finally said, Brian, you need to find a job that you'll actually like, right? Um, because I need to quit my job, right? So uh, I went and thought about, well, I managed a recovery house once for adults, for men, and that was really exciting. And I've always worked with youth, and that was exciting. And um, so, but I didn't have, my degrees are in art, right? So or at that time they were. And so I looked for, youth and addiction and maternity leave on Craigslist, right? So because I wanted someone who's desperate enough to take someone who has an art degree. Um, so that's how I got in there, and that was my first introduction to harm reduction. Right? All I knew was I knew the word harm and I knew the word reduction, but I had no idea what they meant together. And it was a very corrosive process to start, you know, um, uh, thinking about harm reduction. And I was in meetings of like the Abbotsford mental health and substance use thing, because that was what my predecessor was going to, so I went. And there was this guy there named Barry Shantz, and he would come to all the meetings, and he would just um, tell us how we're wasting time and wasting money, and we're just here to keep a crumbling building standing so that we can be there and have jobs to keep fixing it, right, rather than fixing the foundation and actually having something that had a chance of standing. So and he was from this group called the Drug War Survivors, and which all I knew about it was this drug user group, and I was going to 12-step meetings at that time, and I just thought, oh well, this is probably just a mayhem, right? But finally I got to a point where I started to get to know him. Actually, when I called him to get some feedback on something, and when our conversation was over, he said, you're really brave calling me, and which which was kind of fun. But then I started going to these. I took him up on an invite to come to one of the drug war survivors meetings, and it blew my mind, because it was what I like to say is like, it's the 12-step meetings are around this kind of decontextualized idea about sobriety. It's contained within the person, and no matter what's happening in your life, don't use drugs, right?
Right.
There are lots of people who use drugs, even though they've gone to those 12-step meetings and have heard the message of whatever going on in your life, don't use drugs, right? So it's I'm not saying it's an unsuccessful approach, but it's just about as successful as everything else for the right people at the right time, right? But this was built around inclusion instead, right? And network, right? It was a network. It was like, how can we get as many diverse nodes, in this network into the room? The problem with the diversity, there's not that much diversity I think in 12-step groups, there's the diversity is limited by dogma, right? And in drug user groups, the diversity is limited by stigma. And I absolutely had that stigma. I was expecting mayhem, and I got it to a large extent, right, when I went to the meeting. But it was this beautiful, loving, embracing, uh, authentic mayhem, right? I was incredibly bored with my life at that time, because what had happened is in the 12-step, I'm not saying everyone takes this away from a 12-step involvement with 12-step, but for me, what it had meant is I'm not capable of dealing with strong emotions, and I have to turn all those over to a higher power. and for me, it became very solipsistic. It was, well, I can't prove that there's not a higher power. I can't prove that there's not, a um, something else that's controlling all of this. And then suddenly it was just like, well, I could just be imagining it all. And if I'm imagining it, that does make it really safe, right? And it did. I had a very over from my adolescence. I had a really tuned up nervous system, and um, living in a world that possibly I'm imagining. I used to pretend I would pretend that I'm a dead person on vacation in life, right? And the worst thing that ever could happen to me had already happened, and I'm just here for the ride, right? And that was fantastic for for calming down my nervous system and making me uh, through experiential things realize that I'm not going to explode or anything. But it became incredibly meaningless, because like, what am I doing with all this peace I now have? Right? What's the purpose of it? Is it just for me to feel better? Right? And so there was no kind of meaning in it, but it was useful. And I get so conflicted now when I work with people, just because I know there was so much that was valuable for me in that solipsistic existence, but I would never want to go back there.
Right.
But again, this is another experience that I don't have to deny. I don't have to. It's just another piece of this ever-growing network.
So the drug war survivors had a big effect on you.
It took a life that I had become. I was living completely in nostalgia, right? Um, and I was in a relationship for like 9 or 10 years, and when I was having a problem, I was going up and hitting a pillow instead of like talking to my partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
These um, uh, and I wasn't sure if he was real, right? And to have that close of a relationship, maybe I'm just imagining him, and I didn't need all that safety anymore, right? But it had become such a, and so that what was weird to me about running into Barry is he showed up at meetings all the time, and I knew he was smoking pot. He said he didn't drink because when he drank, he things went wrong for him, but he was doing other things, and I was just waiting for him to crumble, right? Because that was the whole narrative. And what I saw, I mean, he did um, have a lot of health problems because of how upset he got about things. Um, but he was living, right? And um, I can't tell you how many meetings in the community where I just would break down crying, thanking Barry for bringing my life back, right? And people, I don't know, I cry notoriously, I think, in meetings all the time. But it was a huge, and I have not talked anything about the drug war survivors or what the work we were doing, but what it did for me. And I've seen this happen for other people who have gotten introduced to the drug war survivors. It's the other thing is it's just so authentic, like, and there's the they haven't outsourced their, well, partly because they can't, but they haven't outsourced their problem solving, their communal problem solving, to the police, right? Nobody will call the police on somebody. They have to work that out for themselves, um, and therefore there's a much more of a sense of community, and that when something goes wrong, we have to figure it out.
I'm wondering if you could share that story that was on the news and in the newspaper about this woman who befriended them. You know that?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I wonder if you could share that.
So that's Peggy Allen, and she she and her husband uh, bought some land in Abbotsford, really nice wooded kind of area built with a little stream going by, and um, started a family there. And then uh, the Salvation Army got approved to be right next to their property. And um, she, uh, sh there was so much chaos going on around her. I mean, she'd hear people screaming, and um, they put up a big fence around their place. They bought security cameras. She called the police like 500 times, and obviously, like, what are the police going to do? I mean, you can't take. I mean, yes, you can make people. Police can make people's lives a lot worse, but they can't really take people who have nothing and scare them into, you know,
Hmm.
having something. Um, so she was just fighting a losing battle. And then I think at one of the community events where she was on her, ranting about what was going on for the umpteenth time, someone from Fraser Health, Leanne Radmore, was at that meeting, and
I know,
um,
man.
yeah, well, this Leanne's a big part of the the support around me that helps me to be courageous, right?
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah. But she came to a drug war survivor meeting and said, we have this woman in the community, and we got to do something. And so some of the peer network members, I think they got flowers or something like that, and went to her house, and Leanne was there to kind of make the introduction, and she was not having any of it. But they kept at her, and then finally got to the point where they could invite her to one of our drug war survivor meetings, which at the time we were having them weekly, and there were over 100 people there until we figured out what the room limit was, and then we had to reduce it. But um, I think she came initially to take a strap out of everyone, right, or whatever that term is, um, and and I think she had an experience like I had, right? She got there, and it was so authentic, and people were the thing about a drug war survivor meeting is, like, every time we've had someone from the community there, it's a healing experience,
Hmm.
right? I heard some people, some elders say that, hurt happens in relationships, healing happens in relationships,
Hmm.
right? And I don't think you get either without people.
Yeah.
And um, so she, well, what happened, her life completely changed, right? She uh moved from this kind of capitalistic approach of, like, oh, I bought this land, and when I bought it, it was paradise, and now you've turned it into crap. Um uh and instead looked at her journey, right? Her journey had made her sick, right? And unhappy, and not pleasant to be around. And what I like to say is, like, if if um if I don't value what I'm doing, then how am I going to value my life, right? I'm the one who brings value to my life by living my values.
Hmm.
And I think the way that things are set up with all these possessions and everything, like, these are my rights,
Mm.
rather than my values,
Mm.
right? And I think that goes back to the whole identity thing too, right? Is like, these are my rights as this identity rather than these are my values.
Lovely, lovely.
Um, and what I think is, and just like for me, my my rights were to, in when I was in 12 step was to like be in a sober environment if I wanted to be, and only have people who are talking, because at meetings like you have to identify as a addict or an alcoholic to be able to share, and these are all the rights that you have. And then there's the values, right? Of like, what am I trying to give to life? And I'm not saying that that stuff is not present there. I was able to give a lot of things that were in line with my values, but I was also totally disconnected from life, right? Because I was living values with no purpose. So
So your encounter with the drug war survivors, um, I love the way you talk about it. You didn't talk about it as a work encounter. You talked about it as a life transforming encounter.
for sure. I just think we need, like, we did an event at Jubilee Park yesterday. It was meant to be a fundraiser for this program called Beep. Um, but we had a little reflecting team at it. We were in the middle of a park. There's like a new ice cream place right next to it that's really popular. And there were some people who heard us talking. We did a little panel with a bunch of members of the drug war survivors. And this one woman came up and started to ask us really honest questions, right? That she had, about like, do you do you enjoy? Because people say that people enjoy, um, they don't want to be housed, right? They like the freedom of being, and I think, I mean, and obviously she was looking for an answer, right? Just like, oh, is this true? Like, but it's much more complicated than that,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and it was beautiful because she hung in there, right? She kept asking questions, and our group kept, going deeper into the discussion. We didn't come to any solutions, but we built a relationship, right? And then she stuck around, wanted to know more about what we were doing, and um, I think in some ways, just creating something that's compelling. Like we took what had been a youth serving organization in a conservative community and combined it with an adult drug using population, right? That was super scary when we first did it, but it's compelling, right? People want to know, how did that happen? And
Yeah.
how does that work? And why is that allowed? Right? Um, and I think just creating these interesting constellations and that people get to see that don't make any sense to them is like, first it's just really creative. It's really it's life-giving, but it's also um, invitational, right? I think the more you take risks with the things that you're curious about, the more you engage other people's curiosity, because they're like, how's that happen? And this is not what my life is like. And that's what the drug war survivors were to me. Like they were this thing that I didn't understand, that I thought could not exist, right? And it just drew me to it. And uh, because for that reason. And I think if there's any hope for me about what we can do as a society, it's through creating these oxymorons that pull people in and make them stop thinking about their rights and be more engaged with their curiosity,
Mm.
which then opens up this opportunity to lead into values, because there's so many needs in that community, and people are very aware of that, but they don't know where to start. Um, and where to start is follow your curiosity, but we also have to create these things that make people curious.
Brian, the world is a far more beautiful place with you in it.
Well, it's because I was so bored with the world I was living in that I had to make it a more beautiful place for my own betterment. So,
Well, and you started talking about artistic creations, and you never stopped.
no.
The whole thing was about this, and one of the tragedies I see is that our training of human service professionals is all has no element of the arts in it. Now I'm listening to your story. It started with the arts, and the artistic movements are still there. Um, but it's been a real honor listening to you and being part of this conversation. And thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's been I've enjoyed our friendship, and I'm really excited to see you doing this project too. I think I know some other people who you might be interviewing who are really excited as well. So